Islamic terror and Chinese foreign interference. ASIO's Mike Burgess made it clear these are the top two threats facing our country, yet Albanese has wasted our spy agency's time by writing reports on climate change. I'm going to have more on that in a minute. Also coming up, Labor's spending problem. You've been deprived a tax break while government ministers are splashing 10 times that amount on chauffeurs and taxpayer-funded trips. Andrew Carswell and Basil Zemplis will join me to discuss that a bit later. And it looks like Albanese is standing by to reinstate funding to a UN body where its employees took part in the October 7 terror attacks. This is what happens when you've got a government run by the socialist left. Liz Storer and Joe Hildebrand will discuss in a minute. We're also going to get the latest on the US presidential race, including Joe Biden's laughable attempt to turn his age into a positive.
Look, I'm not a young guy. That's no secret. But here's the deal. I understand how to get things done for the American people. I believe the job of the president is to fight for you.
But first tonight, is the Albanese government prioritising climate change over the threat of Islamic terror? And is the PM wasting spy agencies' time writing reports on changing sea levels rather than the threat of foreign interference? Well, I told you recently that the influence from the heads of our security agencies, including ASIO boss Mike Burgess and Australia's top spy Andrew Shearer, has been diminishing under the Albanese government, and that Penny Wong instead is taking a leading and highly influential voice on national security. The tensions between the intel community and the Albanese government are coming to the surface. The Nightly's Christopher Dorr reports that our spies are being left out in the cold by the Albanese government. To stress how significant this is, it's highly unusual for there to be any tension between government and the intelligence community. It's highly unusual. The focus of security agencies is protecting Australia from our main threats, which ASIO has outlined are Islamic terror and Chinese interference. But the left-wing Albanese and Penny Wong don't want to talk about these issues. They rarely, if ever, mention Islamic terror or speak about Beijing in critical terms. And what have they had our spy agencies divert resources to? Climate change. Christopher Dorr writes, while China remains our #1 threat to national security, one of the first orders Albanese issued as PM, after asking for some Beijing tourist office brochures, was to insist the top national security and intelligence official, Andrew Shearer, drop everything to launch an urgent project, not into Chinese or Russian espionage, not into Middle Eastern terror threats, but climate change. Conduct a cumbersome theoretical analysis into what threat climate change might pose to national security. So Andrew Shearer has had to juggle a review into climate change while protecting Australia from terror attacks. And the threat level has clearly increased in the past 5 months since the October 7 massacre, despite the Albanese government refusing to technically raise the threat level. Well, just before those terror attacks in mid-last year, Andrew Shearer somewhat diplomatically spoke about that juggle in some rare public comments.
It's widely known before the election, the now government committed to a major assessment on the national security implications of climate change. When they came into office, the Prime Minister tasked me with preparing that assessment, and that's an absolutely huge body of work. It involves really detailed intelligence analysis, outreach to our partners, to non-government experts across Australia and globally, a lot of really tough methodological thinking, and as I said at the start, a really complex set of issues to get your arms around and just organise intellectually. So we have to be able to do that while at the same time warning about the possibility of a terror attack.
Juggling a complex climate change report while at the same time worrying about the terror attack. Hello, just focus on the terror attack. Is this really the best use of our spy chief's time? Writing reports on climate change, get the department officials to do that. The spy agencies should be solely protecting us all from the threat of terrorism. And Christopher Daw reports that Albanese has yet to even release the big climate change study the top intelligence guy was dragged away from his day job to conduct. He says that some in the intel community are now starting to feel isolated, exposed, ignored, and frustrated by this approach. Well, Shearer is highly respected in the United States and in the Five Eyes community. He even spent time in Washington. He worked at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. He developed influential relationships on both sides of politics. Australia being seen to have continuity in national security is the main reason Albanese kept him on after winning office. Shearer had played a major role in securing AUKUS. He was also instrumental in Operation Sovereign Borders even earlier. But now there's increasing speculation that he won't be reappointed when his term is up next year. Now, Paul Keating just last week said that Albanese should have sacked both Shearer and Mike Burgess when he became PM. Sacked the spy bosses because they're worried about the threat from China. Well, that was Keating's argument. It's interesting that after these remarks, Treasurer Jim Chalmers stepped in to defend Mike Burgess, but didn't mention Shearer. Have a listen.
It would be strange if I agreed with 100% of what Paul Keating says. And I disagree strongly with him when it comes to his comments about Penny Wong and also about Mike Burgess. I think Paul is wrong about Penny, and I think he's wrong about Mike.
Wrong about Mike, but odd not to mention Shearer. And Albanese, by the way, didn't bother defending either of them. Now, all of our lives, your life, mine, we're all so busy with family and children and work and paying the bills that we rarely step back to look at the bigger picture of our country. But let's look at it. We've got allegations of kidnappings. We have hate preachers inciting jihad. We have the burning of the Australian flag on the Opera House steps. We have violent assaults on citizens and death threats. It's insanity. And yet not one major national security press conference or address by the Prime Minister with the Australian flags beside him to call all of this out. Nothing. Imagine how different the political leadership would have been at this time with any other Prime Minister, either Labor or Liberal, if it had been a centrist Labor PM. And despite ASIO coming out just last week to warn about Chinese foreign interference being the single most serious threat to our nation, again, where was the address from the Prime Minister vowing to fight and target and crack down on foreign espionage or any attempts to interfere with our democracy? Because Albanese clearly doesn't want to criticise China. He wants to cozy up to Beijing and President Xi, even though ASIO says they are our top security threat. And Albanese now looks like he wants to return funding to UNRWA despite its links to Hamas, which haven't been sorted out, even though Islamic terror is our top terror threat. We have this inconceivable, incomprehensible and bewildering situation where the PM and the Foreign Minister are routinely failing to publicly speak about the top security threats to our country. Well, Sky News host Liz Storer and contributor Jo Hildebrand join me now to discuss this. Welcome to you both.
Thanks,
hello, hello.
Good to be here.
Look, Jo, Penny Wong here. You never hear her criticise China.
Yes.
She has become internally, and I'm sure you're hearing this as well, the most influential voice on national security. And this is causing tensions, as we've spoken about, as now Christopher Dawes reporting. It's causing tensions between the government and the intel community.
Yeah, I think what this speaks to is a sort of cultural problem within the left of the Labor Party where They've never taken national security particularly seriously. They've often thought that it was all just a sort of, any concern about China was just a beat up of Sky News After Dark or the Right or the Murdoch Press or whatever it may be. And so, and again, there's also that tendency in the left, and this runs parallel to it, to be a kind of a party of protest and to be to rail against these sinister forces, be it again Murdoch, Sky, Dutton, whoever it might be. That is very different to the approach of the right of the Labor Party. In fact, it's almost a direct opposite. It's one of many, many differences. And Anthony Albanese, without a shadow of a doubt, is absolutely convinced that he is a centrist Prime Minister. He absolutely believes it. Yes, we all know that he's...
Everyone suffers from the occasional bit of self-delusion, but this is a major one.
We all know that he came from the left, but in a sense, he's sort of going on a journey. It's a journey that started many, many years ago when he positioned himself at the centre to sort of outflank Bill Shorten on the right, which is very, very weird for anyone who follows internal Labor politics. But that is exactly what he did. He was always more of a fixer than an ideological leftist. He was a party machine man who just fixed problems rather than someone who really, chained themselves to a tree over Palestine and whatever it is. And so, coming into the top job, the Prime Ministership, he's, as I've said before, looking at a lot of these issues really seriously for the first time. The problem is that the people he may or may not have surrounding him, or some of, and the background that he's come from,
given him the numbers to get here.
Filled with people. Well, the right. He became the Prime Minister with numbers from the right and caucus as well as the left. But that those people still just don't take seriously things like, Hamas, China, Islamic terrorism.
And we're seeing that now. Liz, give me a Prime Minister who will hold a press conference with the flags behind them and show some leadership on national security.
Yeah, unfortunately not in Australia. For starters, they never fly the Australian flag behind them nowadays. It's all the Aboriginal flag and the Torres Strait Islander flag. But what reason could you possibly give not to take China seriously after they've just announced they're going to grow their military budget by 7.2%, totalling $235 billion just in this year alone? These guys are serious, so why aren't our leaders taking them seriously? It's harrowing. Also, regarding this report that, quite ridiculously, the Office of National Security had to drop everything to put together.
Yes, the climate change report.
Why the heck haven't we seen it? Obviously, the taxpayer dollar would have paid for this. It was finished in December 2022. Why haven't we seen it yet? We've heard all these boogeyman stories about it, but no one's actually come up with a redacted copy, if that's all you're going to let us be aware of.
I mean, what's it going to say anyway? Yes, there are climate change issues and we're going to see migration flow to Australia.
Well, I'd love to know what kind of fear porn they're peddling, because we're hearing stories of, no, we're talking about famines. We're talking about the conflicts that will take place over limited resources. We're talking about mass migration as a result of, these terrible climate change things that are going to happen. Well, show us the report then. We paid for it. If it was worth the Office of National Security dropping everything else to put this ridiculous thing together, show us what's in it.
Publish it, exactly.
What are you hiding?
Now, let's turn to the biggest scandal of the day. This has been like Watergate globally, making headlines every single news. Yeah, Watergate. Good call, Joe. Making headlines everywhere around the world. Global photo agencies have removed the first image of Princess Kate since her surgery over concerns that the picture has been doctored or digitally manipulated. There are 4 places where it appears to have been manipulated, according to the photo experts. This image was originally supplied by the royals themselves. They claimed it had been taken by Prince William.
You must be good at Photoshop.
Yeah. So, Joe, what has gone on here? And the whole point of this photo was to reassure the public that Kate's health was fine, but it's done the reverse now. Everyone's more worried than ever.
Yeah, well, it's good to know that Prince Andrew's PR team have found another job. That's first, whoever's idea this was. I've got a great idea. Yeah, we'll put this photo out. That'll show everyone. Is just an absolute knucklehead, and they should be on the pavement by the time of close of business at the end of the day. Firstly, it appears what they've done, or at least what I would have done. I used to be a bit of a Photoshop wizard myself back when I was a, young media dude. I photoshopped Jeff Kennett's face onto the body.
Oh, back when you were at the Daily Telegraph.
No, well, it was actually, that's right.
And everybody bought it.
Helping with the front pages.
Even before that was just sort of the fun part. But no, this is in the late 90s. I was editor of the Melbourne Uni Student newspaper, and we did a giant poster with Jeff Kennett's face on Michael Jackson's body, and you've got to be really careful about that stuff. So I had to bring all the ringlets forward, so it looked like,
nice.
It looked like, and Michael Jackson's there with a leather jacket with Jeff Kennett's face, and underneath it just had, "Who's bad?" Anyway,
but in this
point
instance...
being, so what it seems they have done, I mean, we don't have her hands don't have a wedding ring or an engagement ring on them. Why, if you're trying to send a message that everything's okay and she hasn't flown the coop, wouldn't you attend to that?
The question is it just a completely fake image?
Even people were saying even the tree in the background at this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, it is, of course, there shouldn't be any green leaves on the tree. So
that the question is why, if it is a completely false image, Liz, and there is no wedding ring, there's elements all in the picture which seem to be highly unusual. The question is, why would they do it? Why not just wait until she has recovered?
Yeah, and when you've got the resources of the royal family, you'd think if you were going to do a Photoshop job, you'd hire the best in the business. But the fact that it's not one glitch in this photo, it's several. Wasn't aware of the tree. Thanks, Joe, for adding that to the list. People can just tell
of this photo
something is definitely wrong with this photo, and rather than putting anyone's minds at ease, it is simply fueled some of the craziest conspiracy theories that you've ever heard about the royal family. So, unfortunately, it's backfired spectacularly.
Yeah. Well, the palace is going to have to respond. They haven't as yet, as we've gone to air tonight, but they will have to deal with this because it's been, like I said, the biggest scandal globally.
The good news is AI still can't fake things as well as humans can.
That is good to know.
Still got that on.
Yeah. All right, well, it looks like, back to UNRWA, it does look like Albanese is inclined to roll over and resume funding to UNRWA. This was the UN organisation where employees actually took part in the Hamas terror attacks. At this stage, Penny Wong's office hasn't confirmed that the funding will resume, but sources are telling other media outlets that there are moves behind the scenes to follow the lead of Canada and Sweden that have reinstated the funding. Joe, do they need to be careful about this?
They need to be extremely careful that they're not breaking their own laws, the anti-terror funding laws. So it is a law, and this is, anti-terrorism, counter-terrorism expert and international law expert Glenn Colomites, who is a friend of yours and mine, a very strong Labor supporter who also happens to be Jewish and finds himself often in conflict with many in the Labor Party, which is something that Jeremy Corbyn might have something to say about. But so he has made the point, and I wrote the story about it, that the government, in providing the funding to UNRWA in the first place, promising it, that is, that never actually changed hands, could be breaching its own terror funding laws, which says that not only can you not fund any terrorist organisation, but you cannot be reckless to the fact that funding you are giving to somebody is ending up in the hands of terrorists. Now, the red flag there was when the number of Jewish organisations raised with the government said, you can't give money to these guys. They just,
there's too much evidence.
They're infested with Hamas operatives, and it ends up with Hamas, these resources. And that was swept aside. But now, obviously, that it is known that a number of their employees were clearly working directly for Hamas and often at the front line. For the government to resume funding,
our money,
it would clearly be reckless unless the government had set up some form of amazing kind of oversight and checks and balances of UNRWA's operations to ensure that it's not ending up in terrorist hands. And how in the hell do you do that when it's in a war zone that no one can get into on the other side of the world? So I don't know how. I imagine if they did do that...
I mean, you say, just to pull you up on that point about no money having changed hands, since October 7, the government's given something like $46 million to UNRWA. Just since October 7, going back to 2010, it's been $200 million that Australia has given to UNRWA. So I'm sure some of that $46 million
my understanding
has
is that
gone
I think it was the $20 million that was announced... or a number of several million when that's right, the third tranche when Penny Wong went to the Middle East and met with met with various representatives, including the head of UNRWA, and made that latest funding commitment that came after she was warned about it being put into terrorist hands. So that would be where it would be reckless, where the government has been warned that this might be happening, but gave the money anyway. That money didn't end up
Just very quickly, Liz.
Well, how does this organisation even still exist at the moment? We know that the IDF has said they even found one of Hamas's tunnels underneath the UNRWA headquarters in Gaza. How much more proof do we need besides the hundreds of UNRWA employees that were found to be complicit or directly involved with the massacres on October 7? Where does the UN get off still pretending like this is a legitimate organisation that countries should still be funneling?
Is the UN even saying that, or is this just Albanese and Penny Wong?
No, well, the UN does have the power to shut it down, obviously, because it is an arm of the UN. However, our guys still talking like this is a perfectly legitimate organisation that should have funding reinstated. Given what we know now, I'm sorry, at the time this came to light, we all scratched our heads and were like, do you mean to tell me that you were completely unaware of UNRWA's connections, shall we say, to questionable bodies prior to this? You have to believe that, no, they weren't that stupid. They did know. Now it's in black and white. It's in mainstream media. It's completely undeniable. And these guys are so dogged in their determination to send our money over there, they're going to do it regardless.
Yeah. You know what? If Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese seriously return funding, millions and millions and millions of dollars of funding to an organisation where employees took part in the Hamas terror attacks against Israel, they will never come back from that. Anyone who supports Israel or the Jewish community, that is a line in the sand. No one comes back from that.
Yeah, I think that, look, and again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about this kind of tunnel vision. Like, I know when I was writing the story about this, when it was sort of put to Penny Wong's office, which is populated by very nice, well-meaning people, that like the idea that UNRWA could in any way be compromised was like, what are you talking about? It's, you know, like it was just, and again, and this doesn't come from a place of hatred. This comes from them wanting to do good things, and UNRWA really being the only agency that can actually deliver large-scale relief. So if you want to give any aid to Gaza,
the Red Cross.
The Red Cross is there, but it doesn't have the sheer breadth and scope that UNRWA does.
No, they can't reach into the tunnels.
And then, of course, that's right.
Tunnels.
And then, of course, as soon as that's compromised, and again, there's videos circulating on social media of old lady, I don't know if it's verified or not, talking about just this, the aid that comes in, as a lot of people have been saying, and this seems to be someone on the ground verifying it, that as the aid comes in, it is just taken down into the tunnels. Hamas does just use it for itself. And in a way, that's what any government or authority at war that saw itself as at war would do. So it'd be almost weird.
Other governments would be looking after their citizens, and this is why Palestinians would be better off without Hamas, because their conditions have been appalling.
Yeah, 1000%.
All right, we're out of time. Liz Storer, Joe Hildebrand, thank you both so much. Now, after the break, Basil Zemplis and Andrew Carswell will join me. We'll look at the Labor government's spending problem. Wait till you see how much of your money they're splashing on chauffeurs and other private car trips. Stay tuned. I'll see you in a minute. Welcome back. Well, Labor had initially refused to publish reports into its travel expenses. They were blaming IT systems. Well, it's now finally brought out its reports into some of its taxpayer-funded spending and travel expenses, and it hasn't been pretty. The PM has been caught out spending an eye-watering $47,000 on a 3-day trip to Japan for former PM Shinzo Abe's funeral in 2022, $32,000 of which was taxpayer-funded. We highly doubt Albanese would have been so quick to spend that much had it come from his own pocket. And last week, we learnt that Tony Burke spent $57,000 on a 4-day trip to the US. And it appears to be an all-round in-house Labor problem, according to the latest IPEA expenses report, because in 2022, Defence Minister Richard Marles spent $21,000 on Comcars, and not far off was Catherine King and Stephen Jones, who each racked up $12,500 on car trips. All up, Stephen Jones footed a $43,000 hire car bill in just 9 months, while also claiming more than $11,000 for a personal vehicle, as the Daily Telly reported today. Now, Climate Minister Chris Bowen spent almost $1,500 on a single Comcar trip to announce the declaration of the Gippsland offshore wind zone that they've now reduced in size. And Sports Minister Annika Wells spent nearly $1,300 on a single Comcar to attend the Women's NRL in Sydney. Joining me to discuss this, Perth Mayor Basil Zempilas and Scott Morrison's former media advisor, Headline Advisory Director Andrew Carswell. Basil and Andrew, great to see you both. Look, Basil, first there was a major lack of transparency, with Labor being the first government to refuse to publish these reports. Now they're out. Look, it's not a good look, especially for the likes of Stephen Jones and Tony Burke.
First question, I reckon, and perhaps most obviously, is did Chris Bowen travel on that $1,500 trip to open the wind farms in an electric vehicle? We would hope so, wouldn't we? That would be worth auditing and double checking. Leaving that to one side, though, I think when it comes to travel, be it overseas, interstate, or whether it's domestically in a vehicle, if you're on the ground somewhere, we want that travel to be done in accordance with the rules, and we don't want the P155 taken out of the Australian taxpayers. I won't join the pile on just yet. I agree. I'm one of those that think that our politicians should travel at a certain standard. They should be able to arrive refreshed and ready to go for their work, as long as they are doing it within the rules. That's the key part. It's got to be within the rules. More detail needed on some of them, I think.
What do you think about this, Andrew? Because especially with Stephen Jones, you know, if you've got a private vehicle at significant taxpayer expense, then why are you also having a Comcar? And I mean, the lack of transparency is a big issue as well. How do you get away with being a government that literally comes into office promising they'll be more transparent than any of the other governments, and then they just don't publish the routine travel expenses reports?
Yeah, totally agree, Shari. Look, I can extend grace to the PM on this one, but only the PM. I think getting the PM overseas with his staff, with his security detail, it's an expensive effort. You've got to fly your own plane. You can't really stay in cheap digs. It's expensive. But putting that aside, the other junior ministers are clearly taking the mickey, particularly in the middle of a cost of living crisis. And you think of Stephen Jones. I mean, Jonesy lives in Wollongong. He's a decent fella. But Stephen, get in your own car and drive yourself to Canberra. What is it about the back seat of a Comcar that is enticing to you? Is it the power that brings? Clearly it is. I mean, this is an assistant treasurer. Get in the car yourself and drive to Canberra. When Scott Morrison was treasurer, he drove himself to Canberra. When Barnaby Joyce was when Barnaby Joyce was Deputy Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, he drove himself to Canberra from Armidale. It's possible to do that. And in the case of the unemployment minister, the employment minister, Tony Burke, $57,000 for 4 days in Washington. I mean, what economy-wrecking policies was he learning in Washington that he hasn't already put in place here in Australia? Yeah.
No, maybe you wish he was the unemployment minister, wishing he was unemployed himself. Better that, probably, than being a minister introducing all this radical IR legislation that's going to put pressure on every single business in Australia. Now, according to the latest FinReview Freshwater Strategies poll, the Prime Minister has been able to claw back some points on his personal popularity, favourability. In the Preferred PM survey, Albanese's rating increasing by 5 percentage points in the past month. Dutton recording no change. But Basil, Labor's primary is extremely low, 31%. This is even lower than at the last election, which was at 33%. That itself was a record low for Labor at a general election.
Yes, it's that one on the screen that'll be the real concern for the ALP, their team, their pollsters, their strategists. In terms of the personal popularity or the approval ratings for the Prime Minister versus the opposition leader, I don't think that will bother Peter Dutton in the slightest. I think it's very clear, particularly from his approach over the last couple of weeks, he's not trying to win a popularity contest. He's trying to win an election in somewhere between 9 and 12 months. And he wants to do do that through conviction politics. He knows he'll rub a few noses the wrong way. He'll push a few to the other column, but he's trying to appeal to those sensible Australians that want lower taxes, more productivity, lower costs on standards of living every day. That's what he's trying to do. It's not a popularity contest for him. It's an election contest, and he'll be happy with this distinction.
What do you think about this, Andrew? Is Labor's primary starting to look like it could be a problem?
Yeah, I think Anthony Albanese will be happy that his personal numbers are starting to bounce off the canvas after spending months in the cellar. And that's due to the fact that he's done an okay job in the last couple of weeks. He's won a by-election. Most independent experts would say it was a marginal gain as opposed to a loss. They're starting to get there on their economic message, i.e. they've realised that there is an economy that they need to nurture and put some policies in place to help that. And so things are starting to happen. ASEAN was a success, so you can see why his personal numbers are ticking up, but it's not translating to a Labor primary vote, and that is deeply concerning. And what it says is that at 31%, we are headed straight into minority government. So really now it is the equation of what type of minority government we're going to get, whether Albo needs one or two crossbenchers to wrangle and get across the line, similar to what Julia Gillard attempted to do, or whether it will be this unwieldy, unholy alliance between the Greens and the Teals, same but different. And we're going to see, an erosion of economic policy in this country. We're going to see an increase in climate agenda in this country. And forget about what Julia Gillard did in that minority government. You're going to have a set of Teals here that will not sign on the dotted line and go away and vote, as the Prime Minister has indicated. They will want to be a part of the process all the way along. They'll want their fingers in every pie. They want to be on foreign policy. They want to be on economic policy. It doesn't matter what the policy is. They will want to be involved and they will want to have their say. Yeah.
And I just have to point out as well that the Greens party now is even more extreme, actually by some measure, than it was when Rudd and Gillard were in office. This is now quite an extreme anti-Semitic element to the Greens that is far more emboldened than it ever was before. Now, let's look at Chris Bowen. He's been pushing ahead recently with his, electric vehicle push, but then he's gone and told the ABC that he'd consider what he calls sensible ideas from the car industry on how best to roll out the policy. Look, Basil, you don't know what Chris Bowen calls sensible might not be what the car industry is calling sensible.
Well, we know that it's much, much harder to achieve than initially had been thought, or at least in terms of the practicality of getting to where you need to get to with electric cars. It's nowhere near as easy as people might have hoped. We know that because the big manufacturers are telling us. Even if you don't believe them, you can have a look at what's happened in other countries. And the exposed form tells us that it is just not that easy. So, as a result, we do need to temper back the expectations. We need to understand that this sort of galloping away to everything being electric is not going to be anywhere near as easy and as practical and as quick as we thought, and we need to find new and more achievable levels. And that is the challenge for the government and certainly for the Environment Minister. What are the right targets that we can achieve and that aren't going to cost us all a fortune trying to get there? That's the challenge.
Yeah. Just very quickly before we go, Andrew, your old boss, Scott Morrison, his old seat of Cook, there's a by-election to replace him. Labor's reportedly thinking of running. Do you think there's going to be any sort of swing against the coalition here?
No, it's a waste of time, Labor running in this seat. I mean, the margin's down to about 6%, but that's overhyped. Before that, it was roughly around 14%. It is a waste of time. I mean, the Shire is just so different to any other area in Australia. They are deeply passionate about their country. They have always voted to the right of centre, and you'll see that happen this time with an increased margin.
An increased margin. There you go. All right. Well, Andrew Carswell, Basil Zempilas, thank you both so much for joining me. Now, coming up, Joe Biden's latest ad campaign. It's hard to watch, but you can't turn it off at the same time. And also on the ground in Israel, not our Prime Minister, but a coalition Well, Bridget McKenzie will join me next. Stay tuned. Well, to the race to the White House nominations now, where both President Biden and Trump are in Georgia ahead of Tuesday's primary, and it's clear they've well and truly shifted into strategy mode. Biden has released a new ad to mark the informal beginning of his campaign. Have a look.
Look, I'm not a young guy. That's no secret. But here's the deal. I understand how to get things done for the American people. I believe the job of the president is to fight for you, the American people, and that's what I'm doing. I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
Can we do one more take?
Look, I'm very young, energetic, and handsome. What the hell am I doing this for?
Young, energetic and handsome. Well, Biden, clearly they're trying to address the problems about his age, which is one of the major reasons even Democratic voters don't want to support him again, that he's not up to the job. And this all after his State of the Union address last week, where he again tried to convince everyone that he's not a done deal.
And their legacy inspired me to pursue a career in service. I left the law firm and became a public defender because my city of Wilmington was the only city in America occupied by the National Guard. And I've been told I'm too old. Whether young or old, I've always known what endures. I've known our North Star.
All right, Sky News contributors Kosha Garda joins me now. Kosha, look, clearly, oh, and I see we're matching in blue. We got
the memo.
We did indeed. But clearly Joe Biden is now trying to turn he's got to address his age. It's such an elephant in the room. It's turning people off him. They don't think he's up to it. He's had so many gaffes and disastrous press conferences where he doesn't remember who he's talking about, what he's talking about, which president, which country. And so now he's trying to turn it into a joke. But surely, you know, this is going to take more than just a new advert. Surely the Democrats have to look at other options.
It is, leaning into one's age is cute. And I think the most famous example of that was Ronald Reagan, who famously had said he's not going to let his advanced age be counted against his opponent. That was one of those lines that sort of is remembered even decades later. That's what he's trying to do. But you're quite right, Shari, that an ad isn't going to cut it. There's so much video footage to the contrary. People can see it. And the polls bear this out right now, where all the polls across the board in the last few weeks that have come out say that something like only 85% of people who voted for Biden in 2020 say they will stick with him because they think he's too old, among other issues. And something like 97% of Trump voters, on the other hand, say they will stick with him, notwithstanding that many in the Republican base don't like him, also think he's old, but they are coming home to him. And you're not quite seeing that trend with Biden. So he is trying to combat that. But there's only so much he can do. The open question, of course, is once the actual election comes around, will Democrats come home, or will enough of them, defect?
Well, unless there's another nominee, unless, the Democrats manage to get him to step back and they find someone who would do better against Trump. But here's something that's been really worrying in the past couple of weeks. The Democrats are preparing to fight laws that require voter ID. So this would potentially enable up to something like 15 million illegal immigrants to vote in the presidential election. And in some swing states, we've seen in the past that just a few thousand votes can decide the outcome of that state. It can decide the outcome of an election. Now, as you're seeing on the screen, Attorney General Merrick Garland has been pushing. He's been playing a key role in pushing for this. So Kosha, doing away with laws that require voter ID could really have an impact on who ends up as president.
Can and many would say has had an impact in the last several elections, because this is a long-standing issue. It's accelerated under Biden with 8 to 10 illegals reportedly having entered the country under his administration. But in general, there's something like 30 million illegals in the US right now. I always point to my Australian friends that that's the entire country. The population of Australia is basically the equivalent of that is illegal in the country. You cannot govern a country in that way. And they show up in the voter rolls because there's no trust. Like, even if it's not happening, most people believe that to some extent it is happening. But even if it's not happening, the appearance of it is very detrimental to trust in the electoral system. And as you pointed out, Shari, these elections are won and Biden lost on extremely razor-thin margins right now in the U.S. I remind people that the last election in 2020 was ultimately won by 43,000 votes. That was the margin of victory across the narrowest path in the Electoral College. If 4 states had flipped the other way, that were won by 43,000 votes, you would have had a different outcome. So you look at that thin, razor-thin margin, and all of these issues matter almost more than whether Biden's a candidate or they parachute somebody else in, based on your previous question. It's almost less important than the mechanics of who gets to vote.
Well, look, speaking of illegals, Biden has been forced to apologise for using the term illegal to describe an undocumented immigrant who allegedly murdered a nursing student in Georgia. Why has this become such a big issue?
You know, that was quite stark to a lot of people, that that's what he chose to apologize for, and this linguistic cage or box almost that the left side of politics in America has put its leaders in now, that the word illegal is viewed as a pejorative and undocumented is considered better, even though the actual United States Code uses the word alien for somebody who's come in, externally, and illegal is someone who's come in illegally. That's just what the term is. I would also note that Biden himself, who's been in public life for half a century, as well as other prominent Democrats like Harry Reid, who used to be the Senate Majority Leader out of Nevada for many years, are all on record, on camera, using this word many years ago. But the base, the far left base of the Democrat Party has drifted so much in that direction that it's now become almost like a word that you can't speak. And it was very revealing that he felt the need to clean that up after the State of the Union address.
Indeed. All right, Koshigarda, thank you very much for your time, and we'll, of course, report back on what happens this week. Now, the Prime Minister has refused to go to Israel since the October 7 attacks. Other world leaders went there in a solidarity visit. He refused. Penny Wong eventually went there, and yet she wouldn't go to any of the sites in the south where Jews were butchered by Hamas. Well, I'm pleased to say that one of the regular guests on this program, Bridget McKenzie, along with another regular guest, James Patterson and Josh Frydenberg, are in Israel at the moment on a solidarity trip. Bridget McKenzie, who is about to join us right now, is on the site of the Supernova Music Festival, where hundreds of young, passionate, peace-loving Israelis were gunned down, slaughtered, and lost their lives, their final moments ending in terror. Bridget McKenzie joins us now live from Israel. Thank you, firstly, for making this trip, for taking the time. The Prime Minister won't. Penny Wong wouldn't go there. Bridget, what's your experience been like so far?
Yeah, Shari, it's fantastic to be with you and with all your viewers, to be here on the site of the slaughter by Hamas on October the 7th, when so many young, passionate Israelis were gunned down. The parachuters came down behind us here. We've just found out that exits were blocked, and then the brutality was unleashed. We've, as a group, just been at kibbutz down the road, meeting with Danny Carboni, who grew up in Australia, in Sydney, and loves Perth, but his sister, an Australian citizen, died just down the road. And I think it is absolutely a privilege to be here, to stand with Israel in their time of need. And it is absolutely appalling that our Prime Minister will not come and stand with the community of Israel. To hear the story of the butchering that went on just down the road, to walk past house after house, to hear the story of loved ones and community members who'd been gunned down with random atrocities by terrorists, I think been a great privilege, but it's very moving. It's very humbling. And I think for all of us here on the coalition delegation, including James Patterson, Jacinta Price, Dan Tehan and others, is that we are unequivocal that we have to stand against totalitarianism, we have to stand against terrorism, we have to stand up for democracy and freedom and sovereignty. And that is why our political leaders, Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese, need to do better.
I completely agree with you, Bridget, and good on you again for being there. It looks like the PM and Penny Wong are going to roll over and restore funding to the now discredited UNRWA. What do you think of that move if they do go ahead with that?
Well, it's absolutely appalling, Shari. I mean, we are 3K from the border here. We're hearing rockets all the time. When you talk to Israelis on the ground who are, under constant threat at the north and the southern borders, the fact that UNRWA has known terrorists within its framework and its organisation, that we're going to spend Australians' taxpayers' dollars on supporting that organisation. Of course, civilians and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is something we're all concerned about. And that will only end when we can get Hamas out of the way, get the IDF into Rafah, get rid of those last battalions, and then demilitarise Gaza, and then absolutely start de-radicalising so that once again, Palestinians and Israelis can live in peace. But while Hamas survives in the way it's existing and treating its own citizens in the way it has, then I'm backing the IDF all the way over coming weeks to finish the job.
Yeah. Well, Bridget McKenzie, stay safe over there, and we'll see you back on the show when you return to Australia. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, after the break, where is the Princess of Wales? ITV News royal editor Chris Shipp will join me. He's going to again return to this mystery and the discrepancies in that photograph. Stay tuned. All right, we're returning now to the story that's made news around the world today. On this show tonight, we've dubbed it Watergate. Claims that the image of the Princess Kate has been manipulated at the source being Kensington Palace. And joining me now, ITV News royal editor Chris Shipp. Chris, what is the theory about why this photo has been doctored?
Your guess is as good as mine at this stage. We haven't had contact from Kensington Palace for about 12 hours now, when these picture agencies first decided that they would no longer run it, or to use the sort of jargon in that industry, they killed the picture and told their clients not to use it. We clearly contacted Kensington Palace and said, what's going on? What have you got to say about it? All these things like you're seeing there, Charlotte's sleeve, or was this thing moved or that changed? And the response was, no comment, and we haven't had any change to that. In fact, we hadn't had any communication at all from that point with Kensington Palace. So the mystery is as deep as it was. We don't know how they're going to explain this, or why, if it were doctored, why they did it. It's still a complete mystery, and as you know, everyone's talking about it and made the situation a whole lot worse than it was before. So
the original claim was that the prince had taken the photograph of his wife and children, released it for Mother's Day, presumably to assure the world that Kate was doing well, she was recovering after her surgery, but it's actually had the complete opposite effect, and people are more worried about her health than they were before.
Complete opposite effect. Well, look, we've had conspiracy theories running wild on social media for several weeks now. Why haven't we seen Kate? Where's she been? We haven't seen a picture of her. The bottom line is, and we should be clear here, she had a major operation in January. She spent nearly 2 weeks in hospital, and they said that she would be off recuperating at home and not doing any public duties until Easter. Well, Easter's still like 3 weeks away, so they didn't really need to put this picture out yesterday. They could have said, look, Kate's still off work. She's not available to do any Mother's Day picture. But they put it out yesterday. And at the beginning, I thought, well, what a good idea. It kind of kills two birds with one stone. You've got a picture of Kate for Mother's Day, but also it's another way of saying, look, here she is. She's fine. And now we've got lots of questions about whether we can trust the authenticity of the picture. And we don't exactly know quite why or when or where it was taken. But as you say, Kensington Palace told us yesterday it was taken by Prince William, and it was taken in Windsor sometime last week. But beyond that, we haven't heard anything from them.
Yeah. Well, look, of course, we hope Kate's okay, but, it's going to be very hard for the palace to get out of this one. They can't just wait for this to blow over. The story's too big. They are going to have to address it. We'll see what they say. Hopefully we'll know by this time tomorrow. Chris Shipp, thank you so much for your time. And here's Paul Murray.